Good morning. This is Omar Mohammed, and this is our 36 minutes on antisemitism. Today, we are honored to welcome a distinguished German historian, Professor Matthias Küntzel. Welcome, Professor.
I'm not a professor, I have to say. Welcome. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a non-Jewish German social scientist dealing with matters like antisemitism since 30 years. And since 9/11, I'm dealing with especially antisemitism among Muslim societies. And I wrote some books. The last one is the most important one, of course. This is this book about Nazis and the Middle East. And so this is my special topic because, I can read all this German stuff in the German archives and follow up with how Nazis tried to influence the Middle East during the 30s and the 40s. And I think this is a very important chapter of Middle Eastern history.
In relation to that, Mr. Küntzel, I have been asking the question of what is the definition of anti-Semitism. And I think since we are focused on the Islamic world, probably the proper question would be, what is the definition of the Islamic anti-Semitism?
Yes, this is a very good question. Islamic anti-Semitism is a special feature of anti-Semitism with special effects, and you need special tools to combat it. It's the roots of Islamic anti-Semitism are twofold. The first root is being in the 7th century, the time of Muhammad in Medina, and all these traditional Islamic features of Jews from that time. This is the first root of Islamic anti-Semitism. And the second root is modern European anti-Semitism. And only if both comes together, I would speak of Islamic anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with the position that every Muslim must be anti-Semite. That's, of course, not true. And I also don't think that Islam is an anti-Semitic religion. That's not true, because we find some verses in favor of the Jews in the Quran, for example. But Islamic anti-Semitism is a thing of the 40s and 30s. There wasn't Islamic anti-Semitism before that time, and it's very dangerous because it's a fusion of both most worst pictures of the Jews in Christianity on the one hand and in Islam on the other hand. If you put them together, to fuse them together, then you have Islamic anti-Semitism. And a good example is, of course, the Charter of Hamas.
Speaking of Hamas, and since you mentioned the roots of anti-Semitism, whether the early Islamic roots and probably what shaped the current anti-Semitism in the Islamic world is the period of the Nazis. The question is, how has these roots influenced the surge of anti-Semitism post-Hamas attack?
Well, Hamas attack was just some months ago, so we still are trying to find the correct words for what happened. And it was not only Hamas attack, it was also the attack against Israel afterwards, after the 8th of October. And so in both cases, we have to think of what changed. It's a big global change in the way we have to deal with anti-Semitism. And we have, for the very first time in my life, at least, a situation that Israel is really in danger. We can't expect, out of the blue that Israel will exist in 30 years, for example. So it's an existential fight against the enemies of the Jews and especially Israel.
Focusing on the roots. If you can take us, especially you mentioned in your book, the most recent one, and I have read that book, and it's a very important testimony and document. How did this start in that period of the rise of the Nazis and the complex relation with the Islamic world? How did it happen?
Well, it started in the year 1937. We know that the Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, already tried to get in touch with Nazi Germany in the year 1933. But the Nazis denied cooperation because they said, well, this region is for the Italians and for the Brits, so we don't make them to our task. But then in the year 1937, for the very first time, a petition plan was set up by the British Peel Commission. And this petition plan says, well, we want to establish a little Jewish state, just 17% of the territory of Palestine, and we want to establish a bigger Arab-Muslim state in Palestine. And this was the alarm clock for the Nazis in Germany, because they thought if there is a Jewish state, it might be a kind of Jewish Vatican, which we have to prevent with all means. And so they started to educate Muslims in the anti-Semitic direction. And one of the very first documents of Islamic anti-Semitism is a brochure written in Arabic in August 1937 in Cairo, which was translated and published also in German in the year 1938 with the title Jewry and Islam. And so they brought together both elements in this brochure, which was spread by Nazi Germany then during the war over all the Muslim world and translated in many languages. So this was a kind of beginning. And the Nazis, when they tried to convince the Muslims to become really anti-Semitic, they very clearly saw that their racist approach did not convince Muslims, because in the Muslim world there was no racism, there was no Darwinism, there was no social Darwinism. So this kind of thinking was not custom in the Muslim world. So the Nazis had to change their approach, and they discovered Islam. They discovered Islam as a kind of door opener to get to the minds of Muslims in the Middle East. And so they discovered that already Mohammed tried to get rid of the Jews of Medina. Hitler is trying to get rid of the Jews of Germany, and so there are commonalities. And so they pretended to be Muslim and Islam friendly and so on and so forth in order to sell their special European anti-Semitic approach. So this was the beginning in the year 1937, and then in the year 1939 they started with Arabic propaganda, broadcast propaganda in Arabic language. So between April 1939 and April 1945, a special broadcast from Berlin broadcast anti-Jewish material in Arabic language, also in Farsi language, and also in Hindi and Turkish language. And this 6 years barrage of hate changed the Middle East, I would say. It's an before and an after. And during those 6 years, the image of the Jew in the Middle East changed considerably in a bad way. So people who we don't have real proof how the radio from Nazi Berlin influenced the Muslims, of course, but we can compare. We can compare the region where you could listen to Radio Zesen. This was a station near Berlin, and you can compare this region with other regions where we didn't have this radio station. For example, Bosnia-Herzegovina, where we had 1 million Muslims and some 10,000 Jews, but there was no radio propaganda, and there was no hostility against Jews after the Second World War. So this is one of the proofs, or you can compare the positions of Arab leaders in 1937 with the positions of Arab leaders in the year 1947. You know, after the Holocaust and after 6 years of anti-Semitic propaganda by Nazi Germany. And you can see that there was a radicalization of anti-Jewish feelings. Only in 1947, Arab leaders were sure that the Jews started the 2 world wars, which was a kind of propaganda thing by the Germans at the time. And so we, through comparing situations and regions, we can figure out that the effect of Radio Zesen was important and also changed the mindset of the masses, of the Muslim masses. And so these Muslim masses were able to convince their leaders to attack Israel in 1948, which is the most fatal step that created the Middle East conflict as we know it still today.
If we can dig deeper, because I think what you mentioned about the radios and the Nazi influence and the propaganda, I remember looking into the digital Jewish archives of Iraq, and I saw a document of a German teacher from that time, that period, who was writing or propagating the Nazi propaganda. You have to be careful of the Jews. You have to get rid of them. How much of this is still alive in the Islamic thought?
Oh, it's in the Arab world. It's still quite vivid. You have the other tendency with the Abrahamic code. So there is at the horizon some signs of optimism, but it's very deep entrenched. And in Iraq, which you mentioned, was also the only pogrom against Jews during the Second World War, the Farhud from 1941. And I think if a German is going to the Arab world, to Egypt today, he will be embraced with a quote, what Hitler did was so great. And in my book, I give also some documents about the Hitler love in big parts of Arab societies. And so there were very good studies. One study is by Esther Wetman and Meir Litvak about Holocaust denial in the Arab world. And they figure out that even not only the denial of the Holocaust, but the affirmation that the Holocaust was a good thing is widespread in the Arab world. And they give a lot of examples for that. So we can conclude that after 1945, there was a double split in world policy. The first split we know is the economical split between the Western countries and the Soviet Union. The second split has to do with historiography, how to write about history. And throughout the world, Nazis were detested after what happened until 1945. But only in the Arab world, you could be, you're proud if you have Nazi friends. So it was a split, a second split, which we didn't saw at that time because the first split of the economic differences overwhelmed every, picture. But this is the result of these policies during the Second World War, I think, and the propaganda of the Nazi radio.
Speaking of how in the Arab world, and I can confirm what you said, is that there is celebration of Hitler in the Arab world. Mein Kampf is still in the bookstores in the country, and also I am reminded of a personality. I think you also mentioned him in your book, if I'm not mistaken, Yunus Bahri, who worked in the Nazi radio, who is unfortunately widely celebrated in Iraq and especially in Mosul. Given that influence from ordinary people, did it also contribute to the formation of the terrorist ideologies of groups like Hamas?
Of course, it contributed to this ideology. German Nazis in Cairo worked together with the Muslim Brotherhood in 1938. We have proof of that. And Goebbels in Berlin supported this kind of cooperation with the Muslim Brotherhood. They made common dates and they gave talks. The German agents gave talks to the Muslim Brotherhood about the Jewish question. So they tried to educate the Muslim Brotherhood in this anti-Semitic sense. And then, as you know, Hamas is the Palestinian part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So there is a direct influence since that time. And if you see the Hamas Charter of 1988, you will find exactly what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf. For example, that the protocols of the Elders of Zion are a true story. This anti-Semitic paper. Or you find in the Charter of Hamas what the Nazi radio always published, that the Jews are responsible not only for World War I, but also responsible for World War II. You have all these typical Nazi positions in the Charter of Hamas. You have also other aspects of Muslim creed. You have 33 quotes of the Quran in the Hamas Charter, so there are also other elements, and therefore I call it Islam antisemitism, because these Islamic tendencies are also in the Charter of Hamas very strongly. But so we have both the Nazi influence and the Muslim influence. And when the atrocities happened on the 7th of October, we also saw both. We saw the hatred against Jews. Every Jew I find has to be killed. So this was the parole, and if the IDF didn't arrive at the place, they would have murdered more and more and more Jews. So this is one thing. The other thing is the celebration of the killing. The Nazis did not celebrate the Holocaust. They tried to hide it, and with makeshift means. They tried to hide it. They were the first to deny the Holocaust. But the Hamas didn't want to deny the atrocities, but want to show the whole world what they are doing, how cruel they are, in order to intimidate the unbelievers and in order to strengthen the believers. So this is a very special religious mission which we find here. in addition to the Nazi mindset. So we have both in the kind of killing of Jews at the 7th of October.
It's indeed true that anti-Semitism is the backbone of terrorist organizations, more precisely Islamic terrorist organizations. We shouldn't forget also the Al-Qaeda conspiracy that Jews are plotting against the Muslims, but there is also the conspiracy of what they call it, the Zionist organization government that is in control of everything. Away from the terrorist groups, and I don't know if this question is to be asked here in the right place, but we have seen mass migration from the Middle East toward European countries. Does this influence or in any way has a relation to what might be considered a recycling of the Nazi anti-Semitism that was exported to the Arab world and it's now back again to Europe? Do you see any indication of that?
Yes, of course, because, the Nazi anti-Semitism is still there in the programs of Al-Manar, the Hezbollah television program, in the programs of Al-Aqsa TV, of the Hamas, and you can watch those television stations in Germany via the internet. And so what Germany sent out in the Arab world in the 30s and 40s is coming back today to the families of Muslims in their living rooms, in their children rooms, and so on and so forth. So this is a dramatic effect. I think it's not only, in Germany, most Muslims are from Turkish origin. So what happened with the development in the Turkey with Erdogan's course is also very, very important because under Erdogan, the Turkey is getting more and more anti-Semitic, as a lot of opinion polls are showing. And this influences, of course, also the Turkish minority in Germany a lot. So, but I can agree that there is a kind of, it was an exportation and it's now an importation of hate against Jews.
In my talk with Dr. Felix Klein, the German Federal Commissioner, he actually mentioned that yes, indeed, there is a return of anti-Semitism to Germany. He also stated, as an official, he stated that 15% of the German population has a tendency toward Israel-connected anti-Semitism. And also there are the misconceptions that I cannot believe that Jews are not responsible of what Israel is doing, unquote. How has the historic anti-Semitism evolved in the modern days anti-Semitism, the contemporary anti-Semitism? Because we definitely see evolvement in the modern anti-Semitism. And the most concerning thing is that there is a young generation, Professor Küntzel. Sorry, allow me to call you Professor Küntzel.
Okay.
There is a young generation. And when we speak about the roots of anti-Semitism, the question that comes to my mind is like, when did they learn about it? How did they get access to this type of anti-Semitism? They are very young. We are speaking 18, 19 years old, 20 years old. It's not possible that they were able to access archives, etc. But the reason is that because anti-Semitism has become normal, publicly manifested. So how do you see the historical roots have evolved in the modern days anti-Semitism when it comes to the Islamic world?
Well, I think we have a new anti-Semitism since 1948 because of two facts. The Holocaust had happened. This was a main big fact. And secondly, Israel was founded. And both factors contributed to a new wave and a change in the way anti-Semites talked about Jews. And then after 1967, after the 6 Days War, the Soviet Union played a big role in shaping mindsets throughout the world. It was a modern, and I lived through those years. It was a modern time. It was modern to be anti-Israel. The Soviet Union put the slogan "Zionism is racism" as a determination of the United Nations Assembly, and so this kind of hatred of Israel evolved after some decades which were more calm in this respect. But after 1967, also the German left became very much anti-Zionist. And so this developed more and more. And today we see this going together by radical leftists with the Islamists. We see demonstrations in London. We are all Hezbollah. Or we see all these manifestations today about support for Hamas, which is terrible, which is ridiculous, because no one of those leftists would dare to live in Gaza only 2 hours, because, it's a brutal dictatorship and it's a kind of fascism in Gaza. So this is a very concerning tendency worldwide at the moment. And so I think we are at the beginning of a very new chapter of anti-Semitism worldwide, and we have to think about it. And look, I ask my colleagues in different countries, is there any center in the world which deals exclusively with Islamic anti-Semitism? People who are able to speak the languages, to read the books, the memoirs and everything. So there is no center about this kind of anti-Semitism, and this is very concerning, I think, and the events of the last year should give, us hope that some kind of center against Islamic anti-Semitism will be created sooner or later.
In fact, while you were talking, I was about to ask you the question that you yourself asked, because when I look at Europe, there are governmental offices working on combating anti-Semitism thoroughly. There are research centers working on anti-Semitism, the same in the United States. But when I look at the Middle East and the Islamic world in general, they don't even want to talk about it. And that is a big problem. I also spoke with UNESCO, since it's the organization that works besides science and culture, works also on education. And education is an important tool in combating anti-Semitism. And they do not have programs that addresses anti-Semitism in the Islamic world. The reason being, it's too risky. So the question, Dr. Küntzel, is how can historical research contribute in introducing the research on anti-Semitism in the Islamic world? How can this become more visible in order to open the eyes, not only in the Islamic world, but also global researchers, like, please focus more on Islamic anti-Semitism. It's a concern, and you have been leaving it aside, and nobody is beside your important work, Dr. Küntzel, there is a lack of research on anti-Semitism in the Islamic world. What should we do more? What should we do? What is the appropriate way of dealing with it?
Well, we have to fight against the claim that whenever I talk about Islam, it's kind of Islamophobic. This is a way of intimidation, which intimidates indeed a lot of researchers. And I'm outside of the university, so I'm glad I can't be blackmailed, in this respect. And I can write what I think is necessary to write. But my colleagues are sometimes saying to me that they are not able to do the same because of the pressure in their university and the claim that would be Islamophobic. And so this fight against this tendency to denounce every kind of critique within Islam as Islamophobic is one of the big problems, I would say. And I read a lot of comments during the process of the Abraham Accords, and in the Saudi newspapers and other newspapers, there were good articles about the mistakes of the Palestinians in the Middle East conflict, about the mistakes of Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, the mistakes is going together with the Nazis. So it was a beginning of a kind of soul-searching. What happened? What do we have to change? But, Hamas was able with its atrocities to stop this procedure. And I just hope that the Abraham Accords will be able to be revived again in order to continue the beginning of an honest debate about the history of the Middle East conflict. I think that would be very, very important. And, but I'm only a single person in Germany, and my books are not very influential. So I have no really brilliant idea how to change the situation on the short term.
As an academic yourself, if there are researchers who have interest in researching this topic, what advice would you have for them, but also where to look, from where to start?
Oh, this is a big question, and I think we have a new situation since October 7, and you have to start with the Hamas Charter. Well, we have to discuss much more than before about anti-Semitism. And I miss this debate in public debates. There is very rarely, people are very rarely talking about anti-Semitism in this respect. And so we need to learn that, so many researchers on the Middle East are saying, well, you can't compare Nazi anti-Semitism with the anti-Semitism in the Middle East, because the first one was, delusional, without any facts in the ground. But the second kind of aversion against the Jews in the Middle East is, understandably and caused by Israeli policies, which is, of course, a mistake, because, this anti-Semitism was brought into the Middle East in the year 1937, 11 years before Israel was created. And this anti-Semitism was brought into the Middle East in order to destroy the projects of a compromise, with a two-state petition plan in 1937. The Hamas forces at that time, the Mufti of Jerusalem, they wanted to destroy any approach with, accommodating with the Jews in Palestine. So we have to make clear that this anti-Semitism in the Middle East is very damaging, has not so much to do with Israel as many people believe, but has a lot to do with the Nazi influence during the 30s and 40s. It's not a regional problem, a small problem. It's a worldwide problem. And we see it worldwide at the moment that Jews are under threat because of what Hamas did in Palestine.
In less than a minute, and I know 1 minute is not enough, but when it comes to the misconceptions in relation to Islamic anti-Semitism, what are the main trends in these misconceptions?
Well, the main trend in the misconception is that anti-Semitism plays no role, and it's Israel's policy which created and caused the atrocities of Hamas. It's October 7, and they ignore the fact that even Netanyahu wanted to improve the life situation of people in Gaza by allowing workers from Gaza to come to Israel and get much more money and go back. And they allowed the Qatar people to give a lot of money to the Hamas people in Gaza in order to create a better situation for the people. In this situation, Hamas attacked. They don't want to heal the wounds. They don't want to help the people. They just have one aim, to destroy Israel. And so we have to learn from that. We have to discuss it, and we have to draw our conclusions out of it.
Dr. Matthias Küntzel, thank you very much for your insights.
Okay, I thank you for having me here.
This was our 36 minutes on anti-Semitism.